Hello, Guy Peploe here at home, surrounded by Peploe pictures and family objects. And I'd like to tell you about our March exhibition at the Scottish Gallery, The Peploe Family, A Legacy of Colour. And I'm holding in my hand a book which was a prize won by S.J. Peploe at the Edinburgh Collegiate School in Charlotte Square in session 1885-6 for Latin, Greek, French, German, history and geography. He seemed to have done quite well that year. This actually is the bookcase that came from India Street, where my grandparents lived. Just a few streets along, configured north-south, as is the flat where I am now talking. A very similar place, I suppose, and a place that was very productive and a happy home for my grandparents' father and uncle. In this room are lots of pictures which are relevant, I suppose, to the theme of our exhibition, and I'd like to speak about a few of those just now. Here is an early self-portrait, and we have a smaller, even earlier one in the exhibition, but this is him painting himself at work, wearing his smock, pipe clenched between his teeth with lovely clouds of smoke rising, and actually in the act of painting, a sort of action picture. I think he's very successful. And next to him is actually Margaret, my grandmother. They met in the early 1890s, and she followed him and her heart back to Edinburgh, but she worked for a long time until they eventually married in 1910 in the post office in Frederick Street. And I can imagine that in this picture she's perhaps dressed up quite formally, heading off for a day's work at the post office. It's a very direct and charming piece. We can contrast that, I suppose, and compare it with a picture by John Duncan Ferguson of Margaret and Willie, painted in cassis. Also in this room is another one of the Scottish colourists in the person of f.c.b. Francis Campbell Boileau Cadell, and it's a painting, a portrait, if you like, of my father Denis, aged about 19 or 20, and he's reclining on rocks on Iona, which of course was the location where Peploe and Cadell painted for so many happy summers, particularly after the years after the First World War. In our exhibition, in the Peploe family exhibition, we have a wonderful picture by Peploe of the same sort of period, of perhaps his first visit there after the war in 1919 or 1920. In the room also is another self-portrait, but this time in charcoal and crayon, of him standing probably in his first studio in Devon Place in Edinburgh, wearing a sort of long coat and a hat, probably partly because it was a great big, rather drafty old schoolroom which he was using as a studio, and it would have been rather cold perhaps before the stove really got going. Also in this room are one or two wonderful, free, expressive baby drawings. And the babies tend to be my Uncle Willie, who's also depicted in the Ferguson painting, because by the time my father came along 4 years later, I think the artist had done babies and wasn't interested in doing any more. The Peploe family exhibition looks at the work of Samuel John Peploe, his brother William Watson Peploe, Denis Peploe, the second son, and then a wonderful artist called Clotilde Peploe, who was the wife of the first son, Willie Peploe. Together, they make a legacy in Scottish art, which we're able to celebrate in this exhibition. Very different artists, some strong links between them, particularly between Samuel John Peploe and his son Denis, who shared some of the same subject matter. But, for example, very few people will actually have come across W.W. Peploe, William Watson Peploe, who was the older brother of Sam, and most of whose art, which has survived to this day, is very different in character, made in a fin de siècle mode, black and whites, owing much to Aubrey Beardsley, as well as a few fascinating modernist pieces which have been associated, I think quite rightly, with vorticism. Clotilde Peploe, who currently has an exhibition just finishing, I think, in Florence, as I say, was the wife of Willie Peploe, the first son of Margaret and Sam, and her subject is the wilds of Calabria and the Greek islands, beautiful, haunting, savage landscapes, but made warm and familiar by someone who dedicated her life to moving to these parts, living the life there. And we have a film by Lola Peploe, which we're showing in the gallery during the exhibition, which is a celebration of her grandmother, of Clo-Clo's work, called Grandmother's Footsteps.